this third episode of the Source Material series, produced in partnership with Firestone Walker, we look at the international reach of hops that Firestone Walker brews with and head to New Zealand for a conversation with Brent McGlashen of Mac Hops. They are part of the broader NZ Hops collective. Brent's family has been farming hops down in Motueka for 5 generations now, 126 years, and their 2 farms produce quite a bit of the New Zealand hops that make their way into Firestone Walker beer. On the Firestone side, we have Tim Miller, raw materials manager and brewer, and it's Tim's job to source the highest quality ingredients, test and analyze them, and make sure that what comes into the brewery is what they expect to come in. Finding great hops wherever they're grown, whether that's New Zealand or Germany's Hallertau, is a big focus for Firestone Walker, and the long-term grower relationships they've built over the past 30 years stretch far beyond North America to anywhere and everywhere the great hops are grown. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. This is great.
And welcome back, Brent.
Thank you, Jamie. Always a pleasure, especially to hear that lovely voice of yours come through the airwaves.
Likewise, Brent. That Kiwi accent of yours is so reassuring, and I think it just fires off certain flavor and aroma signals now in my head of being at the farm, out there in the Nelson region, and now I can't disconnect those things for me. Well, in this episode, we're going to take a look at how Firestone Walker works with Southern Hemisphere hops, and in particular with Mac hops. And so, but before we do that, Tim, maybe give us a little bit of introduction into what your role is at Firestone Walker.
Yeah, absolutely. My title here is the raw materials manager. So I am in charge of contracting, selecting, and ensuring that we have supply of malt, hops, fruit, anything that goes into the beer. So I get all the fun parts of supplying. I don't have to worry about cardboard or glass or any of that stuff. But I was a brewer for many years here before I took on this role at Firestone. So I come at it from more of a brewer's perspective, I would say.
Smaller breweries listening may be thinking, what a luxury to have someone whose sole job, is to work, with growers and producers and whatnot to make sure that we're procuring the best ingredients at the best time and keeping them in the best shape, and then making sure that they arrive in that best kind of shape, as well, so that when they come in, they're going to be as good as they were when you made those selections. It's, but that's part of the, yeah.
Yeah, they'll be reassured to know that I have other hats that I wear too, but for this conversation, this is the relevant one, certainly.
Sure. And Brent, give us the very quick story on you and Mac Hops.
Well, this year, Jamie, we celebrate 125 years on our home farm. So we're one of the longest standing hop growers in New Zealand. And we just sort of enjoy our history, but also enjoy innovation as we go through growing hops for the world. We have 2 farm sites. We have one that's in the Motueka Valley, which is grown on clay-type soils, and we have our home farm, our original farm, and that's on a sandy silt loam closer to the coast. So they only separate each other by about 10 or 12 minutes drive, but very different soil types and very different growing environments, which give us the opportunity to provide different types of characteristics to those hops to the world. So yeah.
And you're part of your farm is part of NZ Hops,
yep.
And which is maybe the brand that folks out there in the industry are most familiar with, and the way that they would access your hops. Let's talk about that kind of creative process for you all with Firestone Walker, Tim. When you where do the beer ideas come, and and so you all brainstorm and think about what could be interesting. And when you get that brief that comes down and says we want to make say an XPA inspired by Southern Hemisphere hops, where does that creative process go from there? How do you then decide what those ingredients are going to be, go through that evaluative process, and then think about where you're going to source those kinds of things from? It becomes a larger task at the scale that Firestone Walker does, but it also gives you resources to push towards this.
Yeah, I think, if we're going towards a specific style like an XPA, I think kind of the first step is to look at who's making those beers and who's making them well, right? And luckily enough for us, Matt has a good Rolodex of friends that make really good beer out there, so he can kind of pick people's brains. I think that's one of his most unique talents, honestly, is to talk to brewers and see how they're doing, what they're doing, and seeing, what hops are ingredients that they're using. The other kind of thing that we'll do is we'll do a lot of trialing, right? So one thing we have a lot of is beer. And so what we can do is I have a whole series of mini fermenters for any kind of hop trial that we do. So they're just single barrel fermenters that will take beer that's pre-dry hopped, usually if we're doing a hop trial, put them out in 8 different fermenters and then try a bunch of different hops on them and see what works best, or hop combinations. So for the XBA, we certainly did that. We used a variety of different combinations with Nelson to see what worked best. We knew we wanted Nelson in there. I think that's definitely a defining characteristic of that style of beer. And then it's just kind of how do you put your twist on it, or what suits your house character, and going from there.
Brent, tell us about Nelson. You all grow lots and lots of Nelson. Obviously, it's become a signature hop grown there in the Nelson region of New Zealand and named for it. Yeah. How do you all think about the flavors and aromas in Nelson? Because there's some decent range to it.
Absolutely. And look, I believe it's developed over time too, Jamie. It's now Nelson Sauvigne's been out for probably close to 30 years now in the brewing world. And to start off with, at the start of craft, we were growing commodity hops. So we're just going for yield and alpha, basically. When Nelson Sauvignon came along, it was a completely and utterly different flavor profile, everything. We didn't know flavor profile. That word didn't exist. It was just, this brewer buys this is what they have. So then we had to rely on the craft brewers actually to teach us more like this. And then we picked up on certain characteristics of wine type characteristics. And that's exactly what Nelson Sauvignon came through with, was that grapey, winier type feel. But we also didn't really relate to what soils the differentiation was coming on as well. So now we've got 4 or 5 different growing environments with different soil types, all growing Nelson Sauvignon, which all have a slightly different harvest window. And I know Matt's come down to visit as well, and I've shown him a number of things, among many other varieties as well as Nelson, and said, hey, if you guys are targeting something, to the form of an XPA, and you're trying to hold off a bit of the dry grape wine diesel characteristic, let's go for something that's got a bit more oils in it. It's got a bit more punch to it, but it's not going to take over the beer. And I actually remember the first time, it would have been about 2 years ago now, I think, Tim, when I popped over and came through the brewery, and Matt gave us this trial beer. He said, "Oh, you guys want to try this?" And we're like, "Okay." It was me and Devon, our sales manager, and we tried it, and we were like, "Oh my goodness, this is fantastic!" And to us, it was a quintessential XPA, perfect for the Californian palate. I'm all about wanting to, help push for different ranges of beer, and to hit an XPA between anywhere from 4.5% to 5.5%, absolutely ideal as a summer crusher. And if you're wanting an XPA to carry its note the whole way through, you're also wanting a bit of an oil space in there. And like Tim said, Nelson Sauvignon can carry that right to the bottom of the can or the glass. It really, really does. And it was an amazing beer when we first tried it. And I said to Matt, "This has got to win a medal." And he said, "Well, actually it did." So I think you picked up a bronze or something in the first beer that you entered into, Tim, I think, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that was actually one of Sam's beers that he made down at the Propagator down in Venice.
Yep.
That was the first one that we entered into competition, and it won a medal right away. So we're like, okay, I think we're on the right track at least.
So I think that was great. It shows growers are trying to work with the brewers to find the ultimate for their selection of beer in their state or in their region, because an XPA or a West Coast IPA from either side of the coast or anywhere in the world is all different. And we rely on what the brewers tell us to try and get what they want as well too. And I'll openly say to some brewers, I actually don't think this type of Nelson Sauvignon is for you, but I think you should go for this one for your market. And they try it and they come back and they just say, "How do you know?" "Well, I know because you've given us the feedback." And that loop is so important. And we've had to adapt some of our farming systems and learn how some of the brewers brew. But at the end of the day, if it's not a collaborative approach, we're not going to get that, those medal rounds sort of thing. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful way to talk about it. Tim, obviously we're talking about this, and what you say, Brent, is correct. Like the way that type of Nelson Sauvin appears in, say, an 8.5% double IPA, double hazy IPA with a 5 Plato finishing gravity is going to be quite a bit different in how that same Nelson Sauvin might present in a 5% XPA with a much kind of drier finish to it. And so, thinking about the way that all of those other effects, whether it's alcohol or residual sweetness, also impact some of that flavor and the way it expresses is important. Tim, when you guys were trialing and testing some of these different different origins or soil types of Nelson Sauvin, how did you all start to think of it, and how did that testing and trialing shape the directions that you ultimately took?
I mean, obviously it starts for, like I said, when we're trying to approaching what do we think is typical of the style, what are we trying to target, and then smelling the hops themselves in selection if we have a stated goal, or if we're going back, we've made XPA a couple years in a row, so now when we're selecting Nelson, we can go in and look for something that's typical for what we want. We have a reference point. If we're going for a new beer or a different style beer, we can have those conversations. Do we want that same Nelson character in this beer, or are we looking for something slightly different? It's also, exciting to get to see a variety of things and say, okay, this won't work for this, but we might want this just in our back pocket for some other future project. Who knows what that might be, but we know this is popping. Like whatever this has isn't right for this beer, but it is still really good. And so that's the fun part about selection, right? Like selection is one of the funner parts of a brewer's job, is getting in there and seeing, what you want to do. And as a team, we've gotten really good at Firestone of being on the same page. Like if you send our selection team, there's about, six brewers that comprise the core selection team. If you send any of them in to go, get Mosaic right now, they're all going to pick the same one. We've pretty dialed in on certain varieties.
They're calibrated. Totally calibrated
for what we want. So I think that's important. But you talk to other brewers and they're like, oh, your guys' Mosaic is so, I can't wait to brew with yours. And like everyone has a little bit of like envy of other people's selection as well. Like some of those guys at, Alvarado or something, where I was like, oh yeah, he beat us to that Mosaic. And then it was on the table the whole time. You're like, oh, never mind. So
when you all are looking at these, and that's an interesting point, when you are looking at them, there are obviously different ways of approaching. There's the I want the best, but there really is no best per se. Mm-hmm. There is only what is going to fit into the beer and produce the beer that ultimately tastes the way that you want it to taste. And sometimes some of the most vivid and exciting on the table isn't the right thing for that beer. How do you balance that kind of excitement, but also restraint and focus?
Well, restraint's a good word to try and emulate. Sometimes we don't have the restraint and we just buy it with no plan. Obviously, as
keep doing that, Tim. Keep doing it.
Yeah, but that's it's not always the best approach, I would say. But it's finding that key. There is one best one on the table sometimes. Sometimes there's not. There's two that are slightly different. So sometimes we'll actually blend lots. We'll say, we really like this lot. We really like this lot. Can you blend the two for us? Because we think together they'll make kind of the perfect approach that we're looking for. And you can also do that with single lots and then just blend in the brewery, right? We'll take some of this lot and some of that lot and do that. But yeah, the restraint part's hard when you find a really good hop that you really want. And we've done that a lot in the past with a bunch of different New Zealand hops, like, buying some Rakau or Rawaka with no stated purpose, but we know we want to brew with these at some point. Like these are really good hops. We're going to put them in beer. So sign us up and we'll figure it out later.
I understand that. And I've watched it in person. In fact, I don't know if I'm sure you remember this, Brent, but back at CBC in Las Vegas, I was walking around with Matt Brynildson, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go over and we're going to rub some of our New Zealand hops over, because now YCH and NZ Hops tends to do selection at CBC, given the timing and how well that works." And so we popped over and started rubbing hops and watching other brewers when Matt popped in, wanting to jump in and see what Matt was rubbing, or come rub some of my selections with me, Matt, and let me know what you think. It was funny to watch that all in process, and as a bit of a hop guru, everyone looks to that. But let's talk about some of the hop, the blending approach on this. Now, Nelson Sauvin is not the only hop in XPA. How do you think about, Tim, what could complement that Nelson? Because you have a Nelson character in XPA, but it also exhibits this kind of soft refinement. It doesn't have some of the sharper edge that that Nelson. And sometimes those beers, especially if it's in, like, say a New Zealand Pilsner, like, you want some of that kind of punchy edge to it. It gives it that kind of structure. But this has this round drinkability, but it without losing that kind of core structure to it. How do you think about those blends?
It's interesting. I think, especially with the New Zealand hops, they do go well with West Coaster hops as well. I think that there is a good synergy that you can establish there. For XP in particular, it is a Mosaic and a Nelson. It's just those two guys. And when you think about we've been brewing, especially hoppy beers, long enough. Matt has, the whole team has, that we kind of have a flavor profile in mind, and you can do it in your own head of saying, like, this and this together, what how does it work? The best way to figure that out, though, is just to brew it and see exactly how it works. But we have a good starting point, I think, just from knowing different characteristics. But like I said, there's something about blending, especially the New Zealand hops that are so potent and powerful and pungent, with something that might be a little bit different, that rounds those edges off and gives you a little bit more depth to it. I just did a collaboration beer actually up in Bend, Oregon with Bevel Brewing, and we did Azaka Rawaka. One, because it sounded fun, and two, like the flavor profiles really matched very well. It got like this really cool stone fruit, citrus, pineapple, tropical vibe all the way through that beer. And so I think we do that generally with almost every hop. We're not doing a whole lot of single hop IPAs anymore. I don't think very many people are. So you just kind of have to think about what's going to add different layers. And you can do it, more analytically if you wanted to look at the chemical composition of all these hops. The New Zealand ones have a lot more thiols than, these US grown hops in certain cases. So, like, matching those thiol profiles with, the different other hops really can complement it. Something like, a Rawaka or a Nelson that has those kind of more catty thiols goes perfectly with anything that has kind of citrus tropical aromas already to it. It gives that nice depth and actually feels more like a fruit profile would be.
I think what's interesting too, as you mentioned, Tim, hops, in the last 10, 15 years have come a long way. And the way we used to look at hops were two categories. You had aroma hops and you had alpha hops. Nowadays, New Zealand Hops has always considered ourselves as being a dual purpose hop. We don't give it a category because it can be used in all forms of beer styles, and in different ways. And it gives that brewer the license, or the artist's brush, to put their touch on the beer, or how they want to use the hop. And I think it's really quite unique out there in the world. And I've been doing quite a bit of traveling this year and meeting many brewers and been in many selections and things. And now the availability of New Zealand hops and people's usage of it is really starting to step up. And finding, even here in the UK, I've been here a wee while and going into cask beers and stuff like that. And some of the cask beers were absolutely bloody fantastic. A smooth beer that really hit right. And you kind of think, I wonder how that would go with the New Zealand hop, and they're doing it, and it's really quite amazing. So, and that's what we've tried to breed for. We can only breed for hops with a difference. We can't take on the big guys. So we want to make sure that brewers have the opportunity to have that little bit of gold dust that they can sprinkle on the top or use in the beer and create something magic. So
it is a fantastic dynamic. I was just had a beer with Matthew Curtis of Pellicle, UK beer media, and he was mentioning that this year has been fantastic for cask beer, and that the cask beer has been making quite the comeback, especially in this modern hopped context, and it's a pretty phenomenal thing. But that'll take us down a whole nother rabbit hole that can talk about in the future. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of mechanics of quality here. So you have plants growing, in those, depending on soil type and the area of the farms, generally what kind of flavors those are going to produce coming from those areas. You keep track of that through the growing season, Brent. You watch how they develop. You try to harvest at the perfect time to maximize the right character from that. Should note that the farms in New Zealand are generally smaller than some of the larger farms in, say, Yakima Valley. And so the windows may be a little bit tighter, and they, there's not quite as much pressure to, for 24-hour harvesting, just to keep those things going, to make sure you can get all of everything harvested within that timing window. So you have a little, some flexibility there to kind of, hit at peak time. But, let's talk about the quality process from there, Brent, from that harvest and then into baling and pelletizing, because caring for hops along the way, especially when you have these beautiful and delicate aromas and flavors, is also incredibly important.
No, absolutely. That could be a whole podcast in itself. But pretty much, there's a lot of things that get bandied about in the brewing world or hop world, and are you picking late harvest or early harvest or this or that? But for me as a farmer, I'm trying to get everything bang on right. I don't care if it falls into a certain category or a date. When that field's ready and I believe it's ready, that's when I'm going to pick it. Whether it falls on the 10th of March or whether it falls on the 20th of March, or no matter what last year, I don't look at last year's result. It's all individual to that year. New Zealand's got a very changeable environment, like everywhere else in the world, and there's not 2 years that are the same. Just to give you an idea, over winter, we've had record floods, 1 in 150 year flood, I think it is, and it's done quite a lot of damage. The hop fields are all fine. They'll handle it. But already now in my head, I'm already pre-programming how I'm going to grow my crop based around, to give you an idea, might be mad to people listening out there, especially in the likes of California, but we had over 20 inches of rain in 10 days. And those 20 inches of rain fell in the space of 4 days on those 10 days. So big flooding, lots of water goes through the soil profile and everything like that. So already I'm pre-thinking, what has that done to the plant? What can we do to maintain the plant through its health the whole way through the season? And then from then on, we'll pick our harvest windows from there. But it all starts back at training date, how we care for the hops at training time, selecting the exact right shoots that we want. And, it's not a race to the top. It's a race to getting the right quality right from the get-go. And then as you go through the harvest system, absolutely, harvest date is essential, absolutely essential. And there are some guys out there who will pick the exact same field year in, year out. And now with traceability, everyone's got the opportunity to see, into most farms now, oh, wow, I can't believe I selected that. And that's because, the farmer, the grower, the brewer, everyone's got it honed into what people want. But again, kiln and conditioning, I get a number of people who walk into our kilns and they go, oh, I'm not smelling as much aroma coming off. And I'm like, well, do you want me to get rid of the aroma off into the air, or do you want me to store it in your hop cone? Because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to get rid of that aroma. That aroma's got to stay in the hop cone, and it's got to be prepared there for the brewer to then showcase it in their beer and be released in the beer. So, I like people coming up with the kiln saying, oh, is that one ready? I'm like, yes, it is. Oh, but it doesn't smell right. It's like, well, give it a rub. And they're like, oh my gosh, it just fills their nostrils full. And you're trying to hold everything in the hop growing is losing things along the way, and you're trying to minimize that loss as much as you possibly can.
If you want to know how much Brent cares about that, I have seen the little closet and bed next to the kiln up on the second floor, adjacent to the kilns, where he sleeps some nights just to make sure that he's there. Yeah, during harvest, that's the spot. There's quite a bit of dedication that goes on there, and it's something. Tim, from your perspective, when those materials come in, I have seen the Firestone Walker lab in action. I have spoken to your lab staff about how many tests they do, not just of the beers at just about every step of the process to make sure that everything is dialed in, but also of your raw materials. You all take a very serious approach to testing those raw materials when you get things like these hops from a new harvest. Talk a little bit about that process of evaluating, making sure that that you have the full profile and can understand exactly how what you rubbed is now in the hops that you have and how they're going to work compared to how you expect them to work.
Yeah, I think as far as like just the food safety quality part of it, that definitely starts on the farm and with the farmers and throughout the process. And Firestone's a member of the hop quality group. And so that's kind of our outreach program to a lot of those different farms out there to ensure that once it gets to us, it's in the best condition that it can be. Once it gets here, though, as far as evaluation chemically, we are doing some of that in-house. Most farmers and brokers will provide some of that information, but it's still kind of a big mystery out there of exactly what chemicals in these hops are translating to the beer itself. So that's something that's is constantly being worked on, and we're one of the breweries that's doing it. So we've been chemically profiling a lot of the hops, almost all the hops that we get in, and then seeing what translates to the beer itself. There's still, however much science and data there is out there, your nose is still the absolute best indicator of how good those hops are. But it's kind of cool to look and try to break down what we might think is important. There's kind of some classic chemical profiles that everyone is looking at and seeing, but there's so many that are in hops and there's so many that are in beer. Like, what kind of overlap there is still largely unmapped, especially on the sensory side of things. So it's an ongoing project that we've been working on. We have a GCMS in-house, a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer that we can evaluate those hops on a very detailed level. And we're just slowly building all these little profiles. The most helpful thing, honestly, is just to look at the same hop year over year. And we can kind of see like, the levels of everything is lower in this year or whatnot. And that's a good way to evaluate hops, or, from this region to this region, what the differences are, because there are a lot of differences in grower regions year over year. So our lab does spend a good amount of time collecting this data. And now it's to the point where we need to figure out how to actually apply that data to sensory process, which is really exciting, actually.
Or maybe that's something for AI at some point here in the future.
Honestly, yeah. It's one of those things that there's so many data points, it's really hard for any individual to go in and look at that stuff. So yeah, you can actually kind of use these data learning programs to take a look at it.
Yeah, we talk about it, especially, because we're talking about gas, GCMS, gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer results and work, especially in more advanced hop products, those kinds of modern extracts, from abstracts and others, and trying to understand how these varying compounds interact with each other, amplify, mask. There's so many of these compounds and variables. They can have effects at such small levels that wrapping your head around it is very difficult at this point. But having that data now and being able to look back at it and then cross tabulate against your sensory data, because you also are collecting sensory data on these, will probably be a very interesting thing in the future, and help inform some of that. But does that allow you to kind of give some of the folks in the agricultural space some kind of benchmarks or baselines of things that you're generally looking for?
Yes and no. Again, like I would say, the nose is the ultimate test, right? So I would say what's more helpful, rather than giving them chemical data, is giving them historical data, or at least looking at historical data, saying, we found over the years that we really like Matt Kopp's Nelson. We know that that's the place we want to source from, kind of thing. And so making sure that if we're ever doing a selection process through NZ, that their hops are on the table. So that's very helpful, and going back through that, and sometimes looking at pick window is useful, but like Brent said, that's not always the most reliable thing to do. But yeah, getting your nose on everything is key.
And on the farm too, Jamie, we've still got a hell of a lot to learn around science and science of the plant. Everyone asks what is that X factor that you can get out of New Zealand hops? You can have a Cascade as a variety that's grown all around the world, and you put it on the table and it's different from everywhere in the world. But why is that so? There's got to be something to do with the energy that plant's processing, the light source, the UVA, the UVB light rays, everything that goes about it, let alone the fertilizers, the everything that goes into growing a plant, I think is very unique and specific. And that's 20 years ago when I got back onto the farm, I never thought we'd be discussing hops like we do sort of wine and regions and terroir and soil types and different varieties of beers, that's what we're talking about now, and we're trying to hone it in that specific. And like you're saying, on the selection table, what I absolutely love is having 3 brewers from either different parts of the world or different parts of the states, and we're picking the same hops out of a lot of 4 or 5. And what I really enjoy is basically going 1, 2, 3, and then you got to point to which one. And in the background, I've written on my hand which one I think all 3 of them might go for. And I can pretty much guarantee in different regions, all 3 of them will go for a different Nelson Sauvin, a different Motueka, a different Nectaron. But then when they select another variety, they'll go from that same region or same soil type 9 times out of 10. It's really starting to, the data that we're managing to get now on brewer selections, and again, like Tim was saying, it's a majority done by the nose. Let's see if we can delve into that little nose and see what technology can show us and prove to us.
One question I've always had, and I've noticed that, a lot of these New Zealand hops have characteristics of other New Zealand products. These Nelsons have lychee and Sauv Blanc characteristics to them. And I always wondered if it's, the growers kind of picking towards familiar scents, or if it's something about the soil and other chemistry that's out there that's just trending, these aromas into these plants.
Yeah, it's I think it's generally we're understanding the soil types of what things grow better on, and getting that quality. We know we have to produce very good quality hops now. Everyone knows there's enough hops out there to suffice the brewing market. So, when it comes through, say, a brand new hop that comes through the system as well too, they come on to, say, Mac hops. We grow them on for the New Zealand hop growers, and we find out between 2 or 3 soil types which they do better in, which we get better sensory, and therefore that's a more stronger soil type to align to first up. I don't know if science will help us get to that stage earlier. It's more probably learning, and these varieties have obviously jumped through a lot of hurdles to get to where they are now. But we want to make sure that every time we release a hop in itself, a brand new one, it's got to be the next Nelson Sauvin or the next Nectaron or Superdelic or something like that. And we love fun names, but the hops have got to back that up too. So.
Sure. And what you're saying is absolutely right, Tim, that most of the brewers that I talk to these days, they have done blind selection over and over and chosen the same field from the same farm blindly over multiple years, and that the heart wants what the heart wants. You'll find it, and there's much less variability and far more repeatability than people tend to think. And but that also opens up that opportunity to then, as you realize this and can define that, build even deeper relationships with those individual growers, knowing that they're the ones. And that obviously is kind of the root of the conversation we're having today, that your relationship that has developed so deeply with Mac hops is a result. It might have started as some blind selection amongst hops, and then it becomes this ongoing relationship where we can now work collaboratively and also pay attention to how things are moving earlier in the season, get some ideas about how things are going, and keep more communication going back and forth, so that when those hops are ultimately harvested, you get exactly what you want, and Mac hops knows exactly what to grow for you.
Well, and I think what's great too is, when people actually come to our side of the world, Matt's been out a couple of times, and David and Polly came and stayed with us this year too, and you came over, Jamie, and hopefully Tim, you'll get over here as well. I'll put a plug in for you anytime.
Yeah. Keep on telling Matt to send me. I'll be there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but it's great because you can see, hops are harvested different all around the world, from Germany to England to US to New Zealand, and it's that uniqueness that brings your heart back to your nose, and you can understand, oh wow, this is a field we pick our Coleman hops from, or this is where we pick our Mac hop stuff from, or somewhere in Germany for German style beers, and it's an amazing thing, and it's incredible to be a part of this whole craft beer, general beer system, because no other agricultural system in the world does this. You can't go to a dairy farm and say, do you know where your milk actually goes to? It's a very big pin that we wear on our chest that we're very proud of, that we can be a part of the whole supply chain, right from breeder to grower to brewer to consumer, and it's something quite amazing actually. Mm-hmm. So that's what keeps hops in your blood. So.
For sure. Well, let's wrap this up on a romantic and sensory note. Tim, as you are rubbing Nelson Sauvin and then tasting that hop in your XPA, how do you describe it? What kind of words do you all use? And what does that kind of capture in terms of both sensory connection and feeling for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting going from doing sensory analysis on beer and then going to hops, because it's not a one-to-one, certainly. I think it definitely takes some time and experience to know what you're smelling in the hops and what you're going to get out of it into beer. For Nelson and a lot of the New Zealand ones, they all have this, what I assume is coming from the vials, but that indescribable New Zealandiness to them. And the intensity of that, which I think probably most people would describe as the Sauv Blanc or like gooseberry or something like that. I think is essential. So checking out the intensity of all the aromas you're getting is very important, and which sounds like might be the easiest thing, but honestly for me is the hardest part. Like judging the intensity of two different hops is difficult for me. Whereas diving in and like dissecting a hop is easier for me, and seeing every single other component in there. Is there a little bit of citrus in there? Is there a little bit of, tea in there? Is there a little bit of grassiness? And going through, I think, a lot of times as brewers, it's hard to say necessarily it's one-to-one. This aroma is going into your beer. But I think in the selection process, the number one important thing to do is deselect, right? So anything that might not be good for your hops, or for the beer, is you don't want in the hops, right? So when you're looking for something, I think the number one thing is to be really, really clean and beyond kind of what you're looking for. So for us in these Nelsons, it's that nice Sauv Blanc characteristic, the nice citrus tropical characteristic, a little bit of lychee, a little bit of pineapple even in those. And I that's what you want. And then you want to get the intensity right too, because obviously you want the most intense hop on the table. And when we were talking about the analytics of it, sometimes you can get tricked by the analytics. So like, oh, this has so much more oil, it must be more intense. But that's not the case a lot of the time. It for whatever reason, sometimes the lesser oil hops are just punchier and make better beer. So again, it comes down to the nose and keying into what you're specifically looking for that beer.
Having a highly trained group that is all locked in together, fully calibrated, and pulling in the same direction, and all able to find that thing, those hops that are going to make for the best beer. It sounds like that is a defining part of the Firestone Walker process, and that is a great place to bring this conversation to a close. Brent, Tim, thanks for sharing this insight and inside look at that Firestone Walker process, and of course how it relates with Mac hops and those Nelson Sauvin hops that Mac hop grows. It's been great talking with you all. Cheers.
Thanks, Jamie.
Great talking to you.